New album, A Day at the Races. And we start off with probably the most played song in a Queen or Brian May concert alongside We'll Rock You. This is Tie Your Mother Down. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to PLD Projects Crown Jewels. I am your host, PLD, and this is the podcast where I take you through a little journey through every song in the Queen catalog, including solo adventures as well. And we go through every version of every song, trying to figure out which version of the song is the best version of the song, the crown jewels, as it were. We also get some history, some notes, some quotes, and we even see if the song fits my top 10 Queen songs of all time. And that is a journey in and of itself. And this week, folks, Tie Your Mother Down. This is a staple in Queen concerts. This is a staple for Brian May in general. One of the greatest pure rock and roll songs Queen ever did do. And this is going to be a long episode. Sometimes we have short episodes, we only have one or two. We have a lot to listen to here, folks, tonight. Look below, as always, in the description. I'll have links to all the YouTube videos we're going to talk about, and even some we're not going to listen to because there's just that many. But don't worry, I only limited things that aren't really necessary to the topic. I'll let you know why I'm limiting them as I do. But let's give you the rundown. What do we listen to? The album version, the single version, the 1991 Hollywood remix, the air guitar mix, the 2011 backing track mix, a demo version with Brian May on lead vocals, a Trent Reznor remix, an early reel-to-reel sample, live versions, Live Killers, Queen Rock Montreal, On Fire at the Bowl from Milton Keynes, Rock in Rio, Live Magic, Live at Wembley, 2 dates, Hungarian Rhapsody, Live at Astoria 1990, which is Brian May and The Cross, Roger Taylor's side band, which we haven't talked about much because they're from the late 80s, the Freddie Mercury tribute concert version with Slash and Joe Elliott, Brian May live on The Tonight Show, again with Slash, Brian May Band live at the Brixton Academy in 1993, Brian May live on VH1 in 1998, a countrified version of the song, which is actually a cool little sound, I have to say. We have the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction with the Foo Fighters. Not the last time you're going to hear about the Foos in this episode. Return of the Champions live in Sheffield 2005 with Paul Rodgers and a bunch of Paul Rodgers ones. Super live in Japan, live in Firenze 2005, live in Frankfurt 2005, live in Manchester 2005, live in Las Vegas again with the Foo Fighters, the VH1 Rock Honors episode, live in the Ukraine in 2008, live in Antwerp, Luxembourg, Glasgow, all in 2008. Then beyond that, at the iTunes Festival in 2011, at a Foo Fighters concert. It's Queen joining Foo Fighters this time. The Candlelight concerts, which are Brian May and Carrie Ellis's stuff together, where they could take a stab at the countrified version. And also, finally, Queen live in Kiev with Adam Lambert, as well as live in Rio in 2015. Different versions because Brian sings it once, then Adam sings it. There's a lot to talk about, isn't there? So stay tuned. Let's get into it. All right, Tie Your Mother Down, written by Brian May, featuring Freddie Mercury on lead and backing vocals, Brian on guitar and backing vocals, John Deacon on the bass, and Roger Taylor on drums and backing vocals. Now, this was issued as a single in March 1977 in the United States. It only climbed up to number 49. In the UK, it only climbed up to number 31. So not a very successful single, yet it's amazing how much it became a live staple, as I said, in the Queen set list. Once it entered that set list, it really never left. It was reissued as a double A side with No One But You, Only the Good Die Young in January of 1998. Well, No One But You, a song we'll talk about when we get there, a song that was written by Brian and was the last recording by John Deacon, with Brian, Roger, and John in a tribute to Freddie. But they put Tie Your Mother Down as a double A side on that one, and it hit number 13. It's also issued as a single in Belgium, France, Germany, the Netherlands, where it hit number 14, Japan, Spain, Australia, Canada, Japan, also New Zealand. Let's hit some quotes. Let Brian tell you about it. Brian, in 1998, told Q Magazine, the genesis of this song goes back to when I was doing my PhD in astronomy. I spent a few months in Tenerife, and every day when the sun went down, I'd go to the top of a mountain and just play a lovely Spanish guitar I had back then, which I subsequently lost. And I came up with this riff, which stuck in my head. And when I played the riff, I used to sing the phrase, tie your mother down. just as a joke, really. Years later, when we finally came to record the song properly, I fully expected this to be changed. Freddie believed it to be perfect. I thought it was a crap title, but Freddie said it meant something to him, so he knows the answer. And who am I to argue? Sometimes you get a little riff and you just put some words with it, and then you don't even think about what they mean. Musically, the riff was heavily influenced by Rory Gallagher, who has an inspiration to me as a musician and a person, because the title came to represent teenage angst, somebody who really wanted to tie their parents down. And because it's so dramatic, it's always been a good way to open or close a set. In fact, I visualized smoke bombs and lighting changes in the studio. It was that sort of song. I gotta tell you, initially, I also want to say, talking about that, there is a biography I read a while ago. I can't quote it now, but I remember Brian May talking about the fact that in the concert setting, it didn't matter if the band was having a good night, an off night, great night, or if they were really having a shitty night. It seemed that whenever they played Time or They're Down, it all kind of came back together. The audience got involved, the band got excited again. So it's always kind of a reset in the set list, depending on where it was. Now, the next quote that Brian wanted to talk about was talking about the instrumental opening that just appears in the album version. We're going to listen to that in a second. It opened and also was the outro on A Day at the Races. You don't hear it anywhere else. Anytime you have a single version or live, it just really began. It almost is like its own separate track, but it is technically part of the album version, so we'll talk about it a little bit. He states it's an M.C. Escher painting. It's supposed to be the musical equivalent of that ridiculous staircase going around four sides of a square, and it seems to always be going upwards. Every part is going up. Each part fades into an octave below. It's also backwards because I play it all descending. Kind of a cool thing, which we'll get to. Two more quotes I got. One from Freddie on the Kenny Everest show. Well, this one, in fact, is a track written by Brian, actually. I don't know why. Maybe he was in one of his vicious moods. I think he's trying to outdo me after Death on Two Legs, actually. And finally, Brian in 1991 tells Rockline, I'll tell you the truth, I know what happened. Sometimes you get a little riff and you just put some words with it and you don't even think about what they mean. Now I remember thinking, no, this isn't good enough title for the song. But everyone said, well, actually, it sounds okay. And so we kind of lyrically built it around that. That's the truth, folks. All right, let's get into it. Now we're going to play the album version and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it. The link is in the description below. See you soon. And there you have it. I do love that intro. I got to be honest with you. I kind of don't hear it as much because every time it comes up on shuffle, it's usually from a compilation or something like that, which plays the single version. But the intro is really kind of cool when you get a chance to listen to it. I love that like oral puzzles. They're really fascinating oral puzzles. It just kind of always sounds like it's moving upward, and it kind of keeps going and kind of keeps going. It's very soft, very kind of like mesmerizing, and then boom, that the smoke bomb hits, as Brian May would say, and the guitar riff begins. What a great riff this is, too. Immediately, I just start grooving and start banging my head a little bit, not going to lie. It feels like it's the most testosterone-driven song the band has done, especially so far. It's really rip-roaring, sex, drugs, and rock and roll kind of thing that the boys don't usually get into, but it's quite artfully done, very well crafted, very well meaty, earthy, crunchy, raw. Nothing the band is actually known for. It doesn't sound quite as produced and as you would think as the band usually gets. I mean, look at the harmonies. There wasn't exactly a lot of harmonies in the song. Most of the chorus is generally done in unison with a little bit of harmony here and there. Towards the end, the harmonies expand a little bit, but never near those loud choir harmonies that you get from the band that you're used to from the band. It just it's hard to explain why I like the song so much, but I really do. The lyrics are just funny out there. Take Little Brothers from the Brook. That's all right. I mean, it's just like it's really hard to explain, I guess, honestly. But I love this entire song. It does feel like a live concert, right? The whole thing just feels like a live concert recorded in the studio because there's all sorts of things they do. From the very beginning to the very end. The ending even feels like it's an ending, right? That big drum riff. You get that in the studio version. It feels like that's what they would do in a live version. They do here. I'm knocking things over. I'm so excited. But yeah, so that is the album version. Now, there are two others here that we're not going to talk about. We're not going to listen to, I should say. I'll just give you a quick mention of them. The single edit, which is the one you're used to hearing, all that is, the only difference there, it just chops off that MC Escher stereo-like intro from the album. That's all. The rest of the song is exactly the same. Likewise, the air guitar edit. What that is Brian May in the 2000s approached to compile this album, and he ended up compiling 3 of them, and they're called the best air guitar album in the world ever. and it has Tyler Miller down on it and Bohemian Rhapsody from Queen, but he also took a lot of his favorite bands out there: Aerosmith, Deep Purple, The Kinks, Def Leppard, David Bowie, Joe Walsh, the Foo Fighters, Black Sabbath, Satriani, Metallica, the Lynyrd Skynyrd, Motorhead, ZZ Top, Boston, Bad Company, all these artists that he really likes. And that's only on volume one. It's basically supposed to be what Brian feels to be the best way to play air guitar, best songs to play air guitar too. The only difference is Time Runner Down opens the album, and instead of using the single version for whatever reason, instead of using the MC Escher Stairlike intro, Brian decided to patch on a little bit of We'll Rock You. So you get some foot stomps and clams from We'll Rock You, and then it goes into a little bit of the solo from We'll Rock You, and it just goes on to the rest of Time Runner Down. Not sure why. It's weird. It's a little strange. I'm not going to lie. I don't know why he did it. There's a version. I figured I'd talk about it. So there it is. Next one we're going to listen to is the 1991 Hollywood remix. Now, in 1991, Hollywood Records had purchased the catalog of Queen and reissued them all on CD, and they included a few bonus tracks. Most of the time, unfortunately, instead of delving deep into the archives, I'm not sure if it was a permissions thing or what the thought process was, they did a lot of remixes, 1991 remixes by various people. A lot of times ended up being, honestly, not the greatest. They were very dance ravey kind of stuff that didn't really fit the band at all and really stick out like a sore thumb. I will say that the 1991 remix of Tie Your Mother Down is among the better of them. It's not way out there. It kind of just takes the integrity of the song, keeps it, adds some things, takes away some things. It's not horrible. So without further ado, look below in the description, find the click to that YouTube link, and we'll come back and we'll talk about the 1991 Hollywood remix by Matt Wallace. All right, that was 1991 Hollywood remix by Matt Wallace, who has also produced Maroon 5 and also Faith No More. There's not a lot different to it. Mainly, there were some effects done on Freddie's voice, on his vocals, and possibly the backing vocals as well. Fairly minor. It's a little bit of alteration. I'm not a huge fan of it, but it's not that distracting. It's kind of either way. The one thing that is kind of effective, actually, is when he drops out some of Brian's guitar. Now, usually I'm like less guitar. That's a shitty idea. Yeah, for some reason it gave it a sense of breathing at one point, especially in that second verse. He drops out the guitar for part of it, letting the bass and the drums really drive forward the song alongside Freddie's vocals. And then when Brian's guitar comes back in, it makes it sound even better. It kind of gives it a little more up and down to it. It actually is a very Queen-like thing to do. So I really do appreciate that. When I do remixes of my own, I tend to do this a couple times myself. So I appreciate where he's coming from. Happens towards the end a little bit too, add a little bit different taste to it. But that's really it. Not a bad version at all. It's actually kind of good compared to some of the other Hollywood remixes, which we will get to. Actually, we had heard some, so you know my stance on that already. But all right, let's move on then to the 2011 backing track mix. When Island got the Queen contract, so to speak, they also reissued the albums as deluxe editions with a little bit more bonus tracks. And instead of doing remixes, they dived into the archives a little bit, and then to add some more value, they did these kind of like track mixes of them. The band would basically, or the band's compatriots rather, would take away some of the tracks, give us some more instrumental versions. Sometimes they would do just guitar and vocals or something like that. This time they just do basically the backing track without Freddie's lead vocal. It's interesting. Let's take a listen and come back and we'll talk about it. Okay, that was the backing track mix from 2011. Again, not a whole lot to talk about here. It's just kind of cool to hear it. It's got the backing vocals, so there really all it is the track without Freddie on lead vocals. It does have some nice little additional snippets of in-studio banter right before the song begins and right after. Not banter, really, just a few little moments of additional noise from the studio, if you will, which is kind of cool. Gives it that kind of like, feeling like you're in the studio with the boys. But I do like the version to listen to every once in a while. You get to hear some of those things that you don't usually hear because you're, I don't want to say distracted by the lead vocal, because you're really kind of supposed to be listening to the lead vocal. But because you are hearing Freddie, you kind of don't hear some of these riffs that Brian does, or these like the guitar playing he does. But at the end of the day, it's not really meant to be an instrumental song. Really, it's supposed to have the driving force of Freddie's voice, or whoever's voice taking charge, taking command, while Brian riffs around on the guitar. So I'm not a huge fan of it overall. It's like a better crown jewel version of it. It's a little spoiler. I'm not going to make this my crown jewel, but it is kind of cool to listen to. I'll say that. So. All right, let's move on then to the more unreleased versions that have not seen the light of day in a real sense. The first one we're going to listen to is a demo that features Brian on vocals. It was a convention demo, but it is kind of cool to hear. Now, this is kind of a tidbit because we do get to hear Brian sing the track later on in some of the live versions, especially post Freddie. He takes the song quite a bit and plays it. So, but this was kind of the 1976 Brian recording the song as a guide vocal for Freddie. It's interesting to hear. So, without further ado, let's do it. Come back for more. All right, there you have it, a convention demo, although better than most of the convention demos, not the greatest of sound quality, but didn't have quite so much the intrusive property of Queen Productions. I don't know if somebody got to that and tried to take that out a little bit. So you can basically hear what they're doing. Brian's vocals were pretty much absent in the first part of the song. If you stopped it because you thought something might be wrong with the video, go back because he does kind of come into play. It's definitely more of a guide track. It's not really much more than that, but it's just an interesting curio, if nothing else. The backing track sounds, to my ears, pretty close to the final version. If it was a little bit different, it was barely noticeable. But it's cool to hear 1976 or 1975 Brian recording these vocals and going from there. But again, we're talking about Crown Jewel best version. This ain't gonna be it. This ain't gonna be it. But this is an interesting curio to listen to. All right, we'll go to there's another unreleased version that I don't have a YouTube version. In fact, I myself have never heard the full version of this. I call it the reel to reel mix. Now, what this was, it was a 10-inch Wessex reel to reel master tape that was leaked out. Some people have heard it, and I'm going to turn to queenvault.com, which is one of my favorite Queen sources on the World Wide Web. They have heard it, or they know somebody who has heard it because they get to describe it. I have heard a sample of it, which is about 2 minutes long, and I've heard a little bit of what they're talking about, but I have not heard the full 5 minute and 46 seconds of it. To quote them, this early tape from a 10-inch Wessex reel-to-reel master tape features different outro vocals that do not appear on the final album cut. There are points that Freddie's final vocals do not appear, and there are moments where Brian and Roger sing on this take. 10-inch tape itself lists the tracks: Intro, Tire Miller Down, You Take My Breath Away, Drowse, Good Old Fashioned Lover Boy, and Teo Toyate. The album intro was included, according to Queen Vault as well. I wish I could let you listen to it more, but because I only have 2 minutes of it, I'm not going to rank it. I'm going to pull it out of my rankings completely, but I thought I needed to at least mention it for posterity. So let's move on to the final studio version. We're going to listen to another kind of unreleased version. It's another remix. It was a promo CD issued by Hollywood Records that was withdrawn and technically therefore unreleased. We know that Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails had remixed Stone Cold Crazy. That's from the previous Stone Cold Crazy episode. He also got his hands on Tie Your Mother Down. And this is that remix that did leak out eventually, or somebody grabbed a hold of it. So without further ado, go to that link below, listen to reproduced by Trent Reznor, and we'll come back and we'll talk more about it. Okay, there you have it, Trent Reznor's reproduction. Well, you're either gonna love it or hate it, I feel like. If you like Nine Inch Nails, I have a feeling you'll dig it. It's definitely an interesting version. It sounds like I don't like it. I don't really love it, I'm not gonna lie. But I do like getting to hear it because out of all the different ones we're going to listen to today, this is probably the most different and most unique. Right away, it's very, very Nine Inch Nails. Has that distant guitar sound in the beginning, and then he takes the song and completely slows it down, which is an interesting version because they don't like slow down the vocal, but he kind of takes away a lot of the instrumental stuff from Queen, and adds this like slowed down bass and this drum beat. And they have this very Nine Inch Nails synthy electronic pulses, very typical in a lot of trance music. It's very weird, but I don't mean it doesn't necessarily mean bad. It's just what a different take on the song. I guess that's what a good reproduction does. A remix, it kind of like takes it apart and puts it back together. It does feel like every once in a while, it feels like it's going to get a little more queenified again, and Trent's going to let it go. And he kind of pulls it back, kind of touch and go, touch and go. Some really cool parts, though, is we get to hear a little more of Freddie's vocals, especially the Ain't No Friend of Mine part where he holds out that note for a while. And because Freddie's voice isn't ever buried by the more sparse instrumentation from Nine Inch Nails, you get to hear a little more of the Freddie vocals that we don't get to hear when you listen to the main track. It's very slinky sounding. There's some added drum work towards the end. All in all, I dig it. I do dig it, but it's not one I'm going to probably want to listen to the real version. It takes away from the meaty, full-on arena rock version I'm used to. Makes it a totally different song. So I guess I have to be in the mood for it. If I was in the mood for it, it'd be great. But it's not my crown jewel, I don't think. But all right, that's the studio versions, folks. Let's get in to the live versions. I'm going to listen to, I have the YouTube version. You listen to as many as the ones you'd like. The Queen. I'm going to talk about the Queen versions now with Freddie Mercury, which includes Live Killers, Rock Montreal, On Fire at the Bull, Rock in Rio, Live Magic, Live at Wembley, 2 dates, Hungarian, Rhapsody. Those are the ones with Freddie. That's what we're going to talk about in the next section. Listen to 1, 2, or all if you'd like. Then come back and we'll listen and we'll talk about it some more. Let's go! All right, there we have it. The Queen versions, Freddie Mercury era of Queen. The live versions we had again. We started Live Killers. We did live at Montreal 1981, live in Milton Keynes 1982, live in Rio 1985, live at Wembley 2 dates in 1986, live in Budapest 86, live at Nebworth 1986. That was the last time they ever did it with Freddie. So let's go through a few of them. Obviously, your miles may vary. Obviously, this is a straightforward song, so they changed it a whole hell of a lot. But I'll tell you exactly what I think. My least favorite of them, I'll go from my least favorite to the top favorite. And of course, I'm going to save how they intersperse with the rest of the versions to the end of the show. It's kind of like you can get a little spoiler if you take notes of what I'm talking about. Live at Nebworth's Live Magic. This is my least favorite only because it's edited. It's edited down. It's not a full version. They take out the second verse to cut down, try to make the whole Live Magic album onto one CD. So they edited out a lot of tracks. They edited them down. I know I mentioned it before. It was a worst thing they did with Bohemian Rhapsody. But this one isn't great either. I mean, if I want to listen to Time When They're Down, I want to listen to the whole song Time When They're Down. If you want to edit out the beginning, like just go right to the single version without doing the intro, that's fine. But like to cut out the entire second verse just because it just gets over with very quickly. So performance itself is fine. It's really cool to hear nonetheless because it is the last date that Freddie Mercury played with Queen. So that it makes it in and of itself an interesting listen to. But as far as where it's going to rank, it's going to be my least favorite. All right, next up from there, it's Live in Rio, 1985. This was actually released eventually on when the Queen did the Absolute Greatest compilation, which was like basically taking 20 best songs from one of the greatest hits album and putting them on one CD. They also issued some bonus live content. This was the official live recording of Rock in Rio. The biggest difference here between what you're going to see in some of the earlier versions, this is when the band opened the concert with Time When They're Down. And I always thought that it should be first or second played. Because it's like when Brian says it sets the tone. Right away, it just grabs you by the throat and won't let you go. I mean, you can see you opening an encore with it, the same type of situation, same type of energy. But it feels better here than it does in the middle of the concert or even towards the end of the concert before the encore, which is what we get from some of the other versions, like the Live Killers and Live Montreal. It's not bad, but I prefer it at the beginning of the concert or as an encore. This one here, it almost does feel like they almost lose it right before the big daddy at the Doors part. They almost lose the rhythm, but they keep it together because they're professional. It's not my favorite performance from them, but it's fine. It's fine. From there, we got 1982 live in Milton Keynes from the On Fire at the Bull. I don't know, this version, Freddie, it just might be me. Freddie seemed a little bit tired here. Again, this is one of those ones where it's towards the end of the concert, not at the beginning and not during the encore. It feels a smidge tired. I don't love the sound of the band on Milton Keynes comparatively, and I just mean by the sound mixing. I feel like they added a keyboard to the mix. They have like Roger has some synth drums in there. It just feels a little less what I want out of Queen. So that's where we go with that. I mean, 85 is actually, I should mention the live Rio 85, similar setup of some synth drums and everything else. It feels like they backed off of that a little bit when the Magic Tour took place. But we will get there. In fact, we will get there next. From there, it's two Wembley dates, July 11th and 12th. I like the 11th a little bit more than the 12th. It feels like Freddie was very, very playful during that one, really having a ball. The 11th video from July 11th, 1986, does have the segue between One Vision, which is how they open up the Magic Tour, and Time Runner Down. This is kind of like, it's not a segue from anywhere else. It's just this instrumental segment that goes through. You can see it in that one, but you don't see it in the July 12th, 1986 version. Brian does come in a smidge early in the July 11th video, but I gotta let it go. But Freddie's definitely more playful during the first day, so I would prefer the first day over the second day. Over the second day, you could see John Deacon, quote unquote, singing into was probably turned off or turned down mic. He just wants to be a part of the gang. He just wants to be a part of the gang. All right, from there, live at Budapest, 1986. From the Hungarian Rhapsody album. If you notice this one, and if you watch the video I played or I provided, it's a combination because the video version, for whatever reason, added it down just like Live Magic did. It took out version. I don't know why it does that to fit it all into a running time. Well, at that time, VHS, when they did DVD and Blu-ray, they could obviously clean it up a little bit better. So the video you see is the Hungarian Rhapsody official release, and then the part where it was edited out, you get this very bad, the 16 camera version. It's just not a very good, it's a very poor substitution, very not great quality. The audio though was taken from the album. The album version's audio was complete on the full version of the song. It's my favorite 1986 date as far as Freddie goes. And Brian really feels like he kills a solo in this one. It really feels it's hard to contain him. It's crisp, clean, driven. I really enjoy this performance best from the different 1986 versions. From there, we have the live in Montreal version. This one I compare with the Live Killers. The two are pretty similar. They're same place in the concert. They're very extremely fast paced. I'd give it Live Killers even more. I mean, that's maybe it's because I just listened to that right after that slowed down version by Nine Inch Nails. But this Live Killers one, which is from Frankfurt in 1979, extremely fast paced, extremely energetic, and Freddie in great vocal form. Roger get to hear a lot from Roger in both of these tracks as well, Live Killers and Montreal 1981. If I had to pick one of the two, I think I'd pick the Live Killers. Feels a little more raw in a good way, a little more energetic in a good way. But yeah, they're both, you can't go wrong with either version, honestly. So that's where I will go with the Queen versions. We're going to move on to the very next version, the official bootleg. Now, The Cross, which I might have mentioned before, but not too often, was a band that was put together by Roger Taylor after Queen stopped touring in 1986. Freddie got sick, even though we didn't know it at the time, and the band might not even have known it at this point. Roger really wanted to keep touring and keep having those live dates, so he formed his own side band. He tried to make it different from Queen, try to make it initially a more dance rock group, but then he kind of switched gear to be more of a straightforward rock group again. Roger actually played some guitar and his lead vocals. He actually had a drummer, Josh McCrae, who has stuck with Roger since then. And actually, Josh does a lot of great work behind the scenes on Roger's production team. But The Cross had a couple of albums and played a lot of gigs. And on December 7th, 1990, they played a gig at the Astoria Theatre in London, which was at a Queen fan club party. Cross played a bunch of songs, and then for the final four tracks of the night, Brian May came out. And Brian May joined Roger and The Cross to do a couple of cool tracks. They did I'm in Love with My Car, Let Me Out, which is a great Brian May track. It was just released again, by the way, on the famous Starfleet projects that Brian did with Eddie Van Halen. They did Lucille, a cover, Lucille, which we'll talk about, and then they also did Tie Your Mother Down. So that's what we're going to listen to here. It was released to the Queen fan club on cassette only in 1991. This is The Cross with Brian May doing Tie Your Mother Down. Okay, there you have it. That's a fun one. Brian May had never really led on that song previously. So it's definitely, you can tell he's really raw. He's not ready to kind of be the lead singer of it. He's playful. It's fun. It's a fan club jam. I can't really complain about it. He does mess up the lyrics a few times, and he doesn't come in a few times. So it's definitely really kind of a sloppy version as far as that goes. But it's still pretty fun to hear Brian in the Cross play. Cross ended up being a decent band overall. I mean, definitely Roger didn't take any. You're going to find out as we get into the more. He didn't take any like session musicians. He just auditioned some people, got a few cool people to come along, and they play pretty well for what they are. And Brian is great. It's a great addition to it, having fun with it. So take it as it is. Mild May Vary, not my favorite version. Still a pretty fun version overall. Let's take it from the fan club party in Story in 1990, and let's go to one of the biggest stages in the world, Wembley Stadium, 1992, for the Freddie Mercury tribute concert. Tie Mother Down opens the Queen portion of the gig. We didn't know there's a bunch of opening acts that played their material: Metallica, Guns N' Roses, U2 via satellite, Extreme, who, well, they played a Queen medley, but actually Extreme stole the show as far as I'm concerned. Extreme. A lot of people say George Michael did, and George Michael did great. To me, it was Extreme who stole the show, though. Def Leppard, a bunch of people like that. But then the second half of the concert was Queen, with different various lead singers stepping into the ballet slippers of Freddie Mercury, so to speak. They open up with Tie Your Mother Down. Brian actually sings the first verse here as well, and then gives it over to Joe Elliott from Def Leppard, and Slash comes in to play a little guitar as well. So let's go on to that. Wembley Stadium, 1992, the Freddie Mercury tribute concert. Okay, I really do like that version. That's quite a version, but it's not necessarily even the performance, it's really the emotions behind it. This is the first time the band has played together as Queen since 1986, so for 6 years. The band had been just yearning to do something. Brian and Roger specifically were live animals. They love playing live, and they couldn't with Freddie being sick. So this had almost felt like a cathartic release. Here it is, the band finally getting to do what they do best, even if Freddie's no longer with them. But it's also very emotional because Freddie's no longer with them. It's kind of a weird feeling to them. I mean, yes, they play a little one-off here and there. They do a fan club gig. The Cross, the Roger led the Cross. Brian played with the Cross, that kind of stuff. It's fun. This is something a little more real, more real. And right away, what you don't see from the videos, the concert opens up with Freddie on the video screen doing his Deus to the audience. At the end, he says, "This is what you want. This is what you're going to get." And they chose to keep the get as an echo. That's why you hear that get. That's what that's from. Sure enough, like Brian imagined it always, smoke bombs. It opens the Queen portion of the show, and the crowd was wild. They're loving it. They're very into it. The energy is up. It's a perfect way to set up to start the Queen portion of the gig. Audience is dying to hear Queen at this point, honestly. Dying to just celebrate and do that cathartic release with the band members that they love. And Brian gets to start it off singing it, even though he's much better than he was a couple years back in the story. Obviously, he had a lot more rehearsals for this time. He sings the first verse, although it's kind of funny if you watch him. He's a little tense. He's not exactly a frontman. That's why he had Freddie. Brian very much just has a guitar, kind of just sings it as it is, and lets the energy go, lets the fan take over. But he plays it very well. And then when the first verse ends, then Joe Elliott comes on, and Brian gets to kind of like ease back and do his more familiar role. And you see the big old smile on Brian's face. He's loving this at this point. Roger too. John, I feel like is enjoying it for what it is. It's always been said that John took Freddie's death probably harder than any of them. John was Freddie was very protective of John, and vice versa, I feel. So John definitely enjoyed his time, but I feel like Brian and Roger really kind of felt even more at home playing that. Joey does a fine job. He's no Freddie. He's more of a frontman than Brian, so it's good to see that going on. And of course, seeing Slash come in, and Brian gets to have a great time playing with his friend Slash. It's a great energy, great powerful beginning. The band feel like they haven't left the road. They feel very tight. I really enjoy this performance a lot. So. All right, let's move on then to the next version. We got two. We're going to go two Brian May versions from 1993. Brian May, after the Freddie Mercury tribute concert, released his album Back to the Light, which was his first true solo album. He did release the 1983 Starfleet Project, which is a mini album with Eddie Van Halen, or as Brian says, Edward Van Halen and Friends, under the Brian May and Friends banner, just recently reissued. Check that out, deluxe version, lots of Brian and Eddie guitar play, really good. We'll get to talk about that when we get to that release from 1983. But Back to Light was his first full studio solo album. And he toured with that and he did some promotion with that. Two of the things we're going to talk about from this era, he gets on to the Jay Leno show, the Tonight Show, and he played Back to the Light, and he also played Tie Your Mother Down. And once again, Slash came up and joined up with him, which was a lot of fun. I'll listen to that. And then after that, I'll have you listen to the live at Brixton Academy. After the tour was done for the Back to the Light album, Brian put together his first live album, the Brian May Band Live at the Brixton Academy. So listen to both of those, and then we'll come back and we'll listen, and we'll talk about both of them. Give me all your love tonight. Welcome, Mr. Slash. All right, there you have it, the Live in Tonight show with Slash, and also the Live at the Brixton Academy, the Brian May Band. We'll take these both. Now, the funny thing about the Tonight Show gig is if you watch there's another video of him. He does Back to the Light from his Back to the Light album. They were both released on a CD single for Resurrection in 1992. When Jay Leno introduces Brian the first time, the crowd goes nuts. I don't usually see that on late night TV, not quite like this. He has a lot of fans there. Jay barely could introduce him. This is the second song I did. And Brian invited Slash on to play with him. Brian was in the town, Slash was in town at the same time, and of course they're friends. So he just kind of came out and jammed. The difference, of course, honestly, they edited down the song again, kind of like they do sometimes, mainly to allow more jamming time with Slash, which is fine for TV. I feel like Brian wasn't as comfortable in the TV room setting, in the television studio setting, as he is actually in an arena. But it's a lot of fun. Got a great legendary Cozy Powell joins him on drums. Cozy Powell actually, you'll come to find out, becomes one of Brian's musical soulmates post Freddie, when Brian kind of stepped away from Queen for a bit. Spike Edney, of course, the touring keyboardist from Queen from 1984 on, joins him on the keyboards there. Neil Murray from Black Sabbath and Whitesnake, he plays bass, and Jamie Moses plays a second guitar, which happens during the Brian May era and also during the Queen and Paul Rogers era. Jamie Moses would play a second guitar, allowing Brian the freedom to be able to do a little bit more. He provides some solid rhythm guitar playing when Brian gets the lead, and vice versa. Brian being a very magnanimous individual. Brian does forget a few lines during the Tonight Show gig as well. It kind of feels a little like the Astoria gig to a degree, although I wouldn't dare say it's not nearly that loose. They obviously have been recording for a bit. But let's move on to the Brixton Academy version, because that's the one to talk about. This is a great version. This is a wonderful version. Obviously, Brian has been touring for a little bit now. He's gotten to the scheme of things here. He's not a frontman. He's never was a frontman, truly, but he does enough to put the song forth, pretty much. His voice is a little more comfortable here, even though technically speaking, I think I've mentioned this before, Brian to me never had the great rock and roll lead vocal. He was more of a great for the harmonies, and he also did some great vocals on like the quieter songs, some more folksier songs, the 39s, the Someday One Days. Those kind of fit his voice better. Although I will say there's times where his voice does a little some rocking things that actually make me happy. The end of the song at Brixton Academy, really drums to it. It's a great line there at the end. But mostly for this one, man, his solos shred during this version. I don't know if it's the addition of having Jamie Moses on there with him, allowing him to shine, but he plays very loose, but very crisp and clean. Goes off into some directions he doesn't usually go, allows himself to show off a little bit more than he usually would. I do love this version quite a bit, and that's what we got from most of the Back to the Light tour. So. All right, that's the 1993 era Brian May Live. Let's move forward to the 1998 version. Brian did some interesting gigs to support Another World, his album at the time. A lot of different times he did these unplugged gigs. He found this guitar, which was like an acoustic / electric. Like you could play it acoustically, and then you can kind of flick a switch and it would turn into an electric guitar. So he did a lot of like these sit-down gigs at like Virgin Megastores, and in this case on VH1 at the time. He did a couple of songs, like a 6-song set, I believe it was. One of the songs he did was Tie Your Mother Down. Not quite like you've heard. I'm not going to say anything more. Listen to it, and then we'll come back and we will talk about it. Go for it, babe. I told you that one's a little bit strange. I'm not going to lie. It's a very interesting version, though. I got to say, that guitar is pretty cool, although it's weird seeing the rock version, the rock portion of the track, without Brian having the red special. It's very, very strange indeed, but it's a cool kind of guitar that can be acoustic. Then you flick a switch, it's just like an electric guitar. I love the fact it's that slow countryish jam. The thing with the intro story, Brian feels like he's making up as he goes along. It's like a silly, like this song. It's a very silly intro, like a storyteller's kind of thing. It's funny to listen to. He's making up stuff as he goes along. And if you didn't know what was coming, if you didn't know it was Time Brother Down, you would have no idea what he's doing. And the first vocal line would come in, and you're like, what is going on here? The funny thing is, fits Brian's voice very well. This is much more in line with him, a little folksier version, like at least more acoustic, calmer version of it. Fits Brian's voice very well. But then, of course, it's got a very cool solo, like jams out solo in the middle section. And of course, back to I'm a peace loving guy, and then it's like they go, okay, F it, and we're going to start rocking out. They play kind of the original normal version at that point to the end. I don't know. It's definitely a unique version. It's definitely fun to listen to. Your miles may vary, but I was I liked this one a lot when I heard it. So that's pretty cool. All right, let's move on to the next one. The next one is when the band got inducted into the Hall of Fame, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2001. They were inducted by the Foo Fighters. A beautiful friendship between Queen and the Foo Fighters began a few years before that, and still goes to this day, obviously, with the late, great Taylor Hawkins tribute concert happening last year. Brian, of course, and Roger were very heavily involved in that. And this was kind of like the first time they had Brian and Roger guested with the Foo Fighters a few times when they're in similar areas. This is that first like real step of showing dedication. Dave Grohl and of course Taylor Hawkins introduced them or inducted them into the Hall of Fame, and then they played with the band. They played Tired Mother Down. Roger and Taylor doing drums next to each other, which is great. I love watching Taylor Hawkins when he plays with Queen. I love watching Taylor Hawkins anyway. Watching Taylor Hawkins when he plays with Queen, he just has this big shooting grin on the whole time because he's playing with his boys, with his idols. They became really great friends. And Dave Grohl gets to sing lead vocal on this one. So let's listen to that, and we'll come back for more. And not the last time I've seen the Foo Fighters on this episode, but it is the first. There you go. Inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame by the Foo Fighters. This is, of course, during the dark era of Queen, after the Freddie Mercury tribute concert and before Queen and Paul Rodgers went on tour in 2005. Brian and Roger made sporadic appearances every once in a while as Queen. John had retired. John Deacon, bassist, had retired after a gig at the Béjar Ballet playing with Elton John in 1999. So this was the last we got to see of John Deacon play. This is Steve Barnacle on bass, a friend of Rogers. Spike Eddy, of course, joins him, and Brian Rogers to play alongside Taylor Hawkins, who drums like a madman, and Dave Grohl gets to play lead. It's a cool version. It's a very cool version, very fun version. Looking back at this, Dave and Taylor are babies here. Brian and Roger are a lot younger as well. We're all a lot younger back in the day, right? Dave, of course, has a much more rock scream voice than Brian does. So it's kind of a fun, hard rocking version, probably one of the hardest versions they play. Some great backing vocals from both Brian and Roger specifically. I've always said it, I'll maintain it, I'll say it a million times. You're going to get sick of hearing me saying it. Roger's backing vocals is really one of the secret sauce of Queen, to be honest with you, to me. The highlight was probably Taylor Hawkins. Just his energy is so infectious during this. It's a lot of fun seeing the boys play as they get inducted to the Hall of Fame. So cool version. But let's move on, of course, now to what I just actually talked about. We're going to get into the Queen and Paul Rodgers era. And the first one, we're going to listen to a bunch of different versions. They have the links in the description. Of course, we're going to listen to all of them, as many as you want. We'll talk about them. It's Return of the Champions, Super Live in Japan, Live in Firenze 2005, Live in Frankfurt 2005, which unfortunately I do not have a YouTube link for, Live in Manchester 2005, Live in the Ukraine in 2008, Live in Antwerp 2008, Live in Luxembourg 2008, Glasgow 2008, and then of course Live in Las Vegas in 2006, again with the Foo Fighters on a VH1 Rock Honors, a little show that they did. I think VH1 did two of them. They basically took a bunch of rock bands and paid homage to them, talked about them, gave a little bit of history of them, and some of their friends would come play with them. They played a few tracks. Foo Fighters, again, were chosen, or at least volunteered. I'm not sure how it went. Either way, Foo Fighters played with Queen and Paul Rodgers, and Tired Mother Down was one of the ones that they did. So let's go from there, and we'll come back. We'll talk about the Paul Rodgers era of Queen doing Tired Mother Down. Your mama said you don't, and your daddy says you won't, and I'm
boiling up inside. There's no way I'm gonna lose out this time.
Ooh, still with me here. Still with me here. That was a lot of to the Queen and Paul Rodgers era, including one where Paul Rodgers isn't even involved. But let's go from there. It's all. I will say the best thing to say is I'm going to talk overall about the Queen and Paul Rodgers era. Then I'll give you my listing of the order in which I prefer them. Of course, they all kind of blend together at some point eventually. I mean, it's not like I'm doing anything wildly different through all of them. Basically, it's your miles may vary on the energy, the Christmas, crispness, not Christmas, crispness, and perhaps like the playfulness and how energized the band is at the time. But let us go through it. My least favorite of the Queen and Paul Rodgers era, I'm going to go with Live in Ukraine, which is the official album, only because they just do a shortened version of it. It's a good version, but I'm not going to listen to it. If I'm going to listen to Time Runner Down, I want to hear the whole Time Runner Down. It works in the live setting for what they were trying to do. So that is not really a mark against it. It's just if you take it out of that live setting and listen to it specifically, that's the least one for me. As the 2008 tour went on, they did the whole full-on version. So I'm not sure if it would maybe edited for release potentially, possibly, but I don't believe so. I believe it was just played that way. Okay, next up from there, Live in Manchester 2005 and Firenze in 2005. This was the beginning of the tour, the Queen and Paul Rodgers tour. They were just starting out. They kind of were feeling each other out still. Paul definitely made a few mistakes. He was definitely not quite on top of everything yet at this point, as far as stumbling a little bit with the lyrics, I should say. They're not bad. They're just a little raw. They kind of get better as they go along. From then, I went with the Live in Vegas in 2006, the Queen and Paul Rodgers and Foo Fighters. Paul actually more just Queen and Foo Fighters. Foo Fighters did join Queen and Paul Rodgers for some other tracks, but this was the Foo Fighters playing. I have to go back and watch the VH1, the full VH1 Rock Honors, because usually what it was an artist playing homage to the band, and then later on the band would play, and usually they have guests on there. But I believe, and I could be wrong, the only time that a band that was being honored played with the band that was tributing them was this one. Foo Fighters started off Time Runner Down. To the second verse, Roger and Brian joined up. It mostly sung by Dave Taylor Hawkins. Did get a line there towards the end. But it's a lot of fun. But I put it down here at this point. It's still definitely more of a Foo Fighters version. I mean, we don't have any Queen until the second verse. So that's where I got to put it in there. Still better than the Paul struggling a little bit, and the band struggling a little bit to find each other. I should mention the rest of the band at this point. Queen and Paul Rodgers in 2005, 2008 were made up of Paul Rodgers on vocals, Brian Roger, obviously the members of Queen with John retired and Freddie passed on. It did have Jamie Moses from the Brian May Band playing the second guitar. We also had Spike Edney, the touring Queen keyboardist and now musical director of Queen and Paul Rodgers and later Queen and Adam Lambert on the keyboards. And the bassist this time was Danny Miranda, best known for playing with Blue Oyster Cult. And he does provide some good backing vocals as well as lays the bass down. Okay, next up from that, we got Live in Luxembourg in 2008. This was the time of 2008 tour. They definitely flirted with the opening. They started out with One Vision, like 86. One Vision is a Time Runner Down. They introduced some songs from the Cosmos Rocks, including Surf Stop Schools Out. They added Hammer to Fall at one point in fact. They kind of played around with what the opening was. They were never quite satisfied. During Luxembourg, they actually had a little bit of a taped opening before it went right into Time Runner Down. And quite frankly, that actually did really well. I thought that was a very good version to do it. Again, I'm biased. I love how when it begins a concert, it feels like the energy is best then. From there, we have the Live in Sheffield 2005, which of course is the Return of the Champions. That's the live album, first album released by Queen and Paul Rodgers, and it's solid. The band's definitely a little more tighter at this point. It feels like this is a good showcase of where they were in 2005. From there, Glasgow and Antwerp, both 2008, similar vibes, full versions of the song. Roger kicking ass in these ones, I think. Roger getting the great backing vocals in there as well. Antwerp was specifically a good one. I like that one a bit. From then, Live in Japan, which is recorded the Super Live in Japan album that was released later on. Much closer to the end of that first tour. Paul's definitely much more comfortable with this one. The band's tighter, very kinetic, and I like the jam at the end of this one. Makes up for the earlier 2005 tour versions for me. And then from there, finally, Live in Frankfurt in 2005. Live in Frankfurt 2005. I really thought this was probably the best version that Queen and Paul Rodgers played. Paul feels very playful, more forward. He kind of like feels very confident in this one for some reason. And the sound mix I got from this one was also very nice. So, yeah, I think that's my favorite Queen and Paul Rodgers version. So that's where we'll leave it. Frankfurt 2005. Let's move on. Got a few left, very few left. We got this one first. The final time the Foo Fighters will appear. And again, it's a Foo Fighters concert. The Foo Fighters at the iTunes Festival in London in 2011. And they're in London, so you know what that means. They're going to bring Brian and Roger on. And so let's listen to that version of Time Mother Down next as we are starting to wrap things up.
Get your body down, get your beat down, the heartbeat, baby.
Okay, now that was a fun one. That was a really, really fun one. Definitively my favorite of the Foo Fighters versions. This was a pure Foo Fighters show. It was actually Foo Fighters doing iTunes Festival, and Brian and Roger came on. I think my favorite part of this is the fact that Taylor Hawkins does the vocals. Dave steps aside. Taylor gets out from behind the drum set, lets Roger do the drums. Brian plays guitar with the Foos, all big fans of Queen. And Taylor has a great rocking voice. It's not a great technical voice. It's not, I mean, he cracks a little bit here and there, but he's got this raw emotion, raw rock and roll roar. Hit some really great high notes in there as well. He's screaming a little bit, screaming some high notes in there. But you can tell the band just has a lot of fun. Brian and Roger, they've played with them for so many times now. It almost seems like a second nature. This come on, they can play anything they need to play with each other. But it's a very energetic. I think I prefer this side of the Paul Rogers stuff, to be honest. And that's not a slight on Paul Rogers. I don't want this to come off that I don't like Paul Rogers. I love Paul Rogers with Queen. I actually really did. It's the first time I ever got to see Queen was with Paul Rogers, and his voice fits a lot of the Queen songs very well and does fit this song very well. There's something about the raw abandon that they play this together, Brian Roger with the Foos. It's hard to explain. It really is hard to explain, but I really do like this version quite a bit. All right, let's move on then to, we're going to sandwich it because we're going to go by year. We have three left we're going to listen to. Queen and Adam Lambert live in Kiev in 2012. This was the first full gig the band played together in front of about 350,000 people. No big deal. Then we're going to hear a Brian and Carrie Ellis version from Montreal in 2013. Then we'll go back to Rock in Rio in 2015, where Adam actually gets to sing it for the first time, because when we're going to listen to now, it was an encore, and Brian actually sings the lead vocals for the most part. Here, Adam on some backing vocals, but Brian takes the lead one more time. Live in Kiev 2012, Queen and Adam Lambert. But now you know it. The link is in the description. Come back for more. Okay, that was the first big gig that Queen played with Adam Lambert, again in front of 350,000 people. They opened the encore with this, and Adam doesn't really sing. He sings at the very end, the last note. He sings a little bit of the, kind of plays around with the vocals during the ending sections, the All Your Love Tonight. Basically, Brian taking over. And Brian, by now, at this point, has been, he fronted his own band for a bit. He did some things with Queen and Paul Rogers, took the lead on some of those. He's very comfortable at this point. You can tell he's just having a good time doing it at this point. Still, his voice is a little older, so he's not quite got the same edge that he used to have. Still Roger's show, although I will say, I don't know if you noticed, there's kind of a weird section there in the second verse where it seems like Roger just started singing a little bit off almost in a way, not like off, like he jumped in too early. I don't know for sure it was Roger. It kind of sounded like Roger singing. I'm not sure if he was like trying to sing the second verse for Brian, or maybe he thought Brian wasn't coming in. I'm not too sure there. They go on and they finish it out strong. Brian has there's a great jam section at the end. Roger's backing vocals are spot on still, despite his advancing age at that point, even more so now. The rest of the band, it is similar to, they have Spike Edney again, the keyboardist from Queen since 1984. They have a bassist by the name of Neil Fairclough, who still is with the band today. And additional percussion is by a man called Rufus Tiger Taylor during this part. The son of Roger Taylor. It led to some great moments during those gigs. Rufus has since moved on, now is the drummer in the Darkness. I thought he was going to be the Foo Fighters drummer, to be honest with you. He looks a lot like Taylor Hawkins, and Taylor Hawkins was Godfather, and it would have made a lot of sense, but alas, not to be. He's replaced by a man named Tyler Warren, who is also phenomenal, a great drummer from the Queen Extravaganza, official Queen tribute band that Roger had handpicked and toured around. Mark Martelli, you probably heard of him. Sounded a lot like Freddie and did Somebody to Love on, I believe it was Ellen, and he was well lauded for that. Tyler graduated from the Queen Extravaganza to join Queen and Adam Lambert full-time gig. But that's the Kiev performance. went back to Queen and Adam Lambert, but in between, Brian May, I believe I mentioned this a few times in the podcast, so I try to tell where I am and what they did and all that stuff. But Brian had a longtime musical relationship with a woman named Carrie Ellis, who was in the We Will Rock You musical, playing the character of Meat. She brought the house down with No One But You. I actually mentioned that earlier. No One But You, Only the Good Die Young in the musical. Brian and her would be doing a lot of stuff together. They did some tours. They did some albums together. Brian basically produced a lot of her albums, but he duetted with her. He wrote some songs for her, etc. They did some unplugged tours, especially acoustic by candlelight, he called them. And one of them was the candlelight concerts from Montreux from 2013, where Brian and Carrie did Tie Mother Down. And Brian went back to the 1998 countryist version, the acoustic version, to start that off. Let's listen to that and go from there.
I got my timing right. I got my hands all tight.
All right, that's another pretty fun one, I gotta admit. The Brian May, Carrie Ellis, and keyboardist Jeff Leach. That's all it is. Just one guitar, two vocalists, and a keyboardist. So no drums, no bass, no rocking effort there. It's usually acoustic. I said I kind of mentioned I kind of made it a little faux pas. I call it an acoustic because the gig was an acoustic gig mostly. This is the time where Brian did break out the Red Special in there, especially after the beginning section. He has a very rollicking guitar solo towards the end here. It's a very different arrangement. I mean, it's like I said, it's based on that 1998 country version at first, without any other instruments. It's kind of based on just that guitar driving it. Brian sings the first verse, Carrie sings the second verse, and they kind of just trade back and forth with some beats at the end. The piano has it's a nice addition to it, having that strong piano play in the background. It might go a little long. Sometimes at the end of the jamming session, does go a little long, but I still dig it. I enjoy it quite a bit. But yeah, there we go. All right, last one, the final one. Queen and Adam Lambert, this time 2015. I couldn't find a really great version. I got the best version I could find. And there's Adam actually singing Tie Mother Down this time, not just being in the background for Brian. So let's finish this up, finish strong, and then we'll go home. And that was it, the final one we're going to be listening to. Queen Adam Lambert, Rock in Rio 2015. Adam can sing it. Now, this is one of the things I've talked about before. I like Adam with Queen. His weaknesses, though, are more the hard rock songs. Paul can do the rock songs. Adam can do the theatrical ballad, more campier side of things. And this is where the big difference lies. Adam's a little theatrical for the rockingest versions of Queen songs, which is what makes Freddie so good. Freddie could do it all. That's why Freddie was the greatest of all time, the GOAT, as if you were. Adam doesn't do poorly here. He's fine at it. He's just not as comfortable as I think as Freddie was, or even as Paul was at this particular song. But the band is tight. Band plays well. Brian and Roger are jamming around. They're really comfortable. So at this point, 2015 is they're 3 years into their touring with Adam Lambert. They know what they're doing. They're a band that just knows what they're doing at this point. They're just spot on. Some good jamming at the end for Brian. Got some nice little tasty notes there. But yeah, that's where we're going to end it. That is the last song we're going to listen to, last version we're going to listen to. Now we get to move on to the very famous Crown Jewel rankings. Let's determine which of all those ones we just listened to is the crown jewel of Tie Mother Down. What's going in the playlist? Of course, we're going to go from the least to best, from the lesser to the crown jewel. In last place, the one I'm going to put far away from the crown jewel is a demo with Brian's vocals. I think that sounds really bad, really horrible. Like it's like a worst piece of shit you've ever heard, right? It's not. It's just not what I'm going to listen to very often. It's a nice curio, but it's basically the backing track we all know. But it's done in a convention demo style, so you don't even have a good quality of it, even if the property of Queen Productions isn't as overwhelming as it usually is. Brian's vocals don't show up till about halfway through the demo. And then they do, they're obviously just guide vocals. They're not meant to be performance vocal. It is a good curio to listen to. It's nice to hear the 1976 Brian singing alongside his song. But overall, at the end of the day, it's probably the one I'm going to listen to the least. Although it does war with the next one. I'm not going to say. I might actually put the next one last. The next one being the air guitar mix. Because quite frankly, it's just odd. It's just strange. I feel like Brian, when he was compiling this air guitar album, he wanted to have 3 Queen songs on there, was only contractually allowed 2. So he had Tie Mother Down and he put Bohemian Rhapsody at the end. But he decided, well, I'll show them. I'll just cut off the end of We'll Rock You and just shove it on the beginning of Tie Your Mother Down. Voila, new mix. I get We'll Rock You, I get Tie Your Mother Down, and Bohemian Rhapsody. That's exactly what it sounds like too. It just sounds very odd, very strange, very tacked on. So I'd much rather listen to almost any other version. Maybe even the demo with Brian vocals. I'll leave it live for there. At this point, 6 1/2 dozen the other. All right, from there, live in Astoria 1990, the Cross and Brian May version. It's something to be said that it's a fan club fun version. I don't think it was rehearsed very well. It's a sloppier mix. I think Brian wasn't quite ready for the challenge of the lead vocals being the front man at the time. He would develop those skills as he goes along. He's never a full front man, to be completely honest. He's never going to be one to be the front man, but he can handle it as he gets further on into his career. At this point, not quite there yet. Fun version. The whole album is actually kind of cool. I'm glad that they released this. I don't want to criticize it too much because it's kind of fun just to have the bootleg, the official bootleg. Some great representation of the Cross in 1990 and getting Brian to play in a couple songs. That's fun. Why not? All right, next up, I'm going to lump these two together. Live in the Ukraine 2008 with Queen and Paul Rodgers, and live in Nebworth 1986, the live Magic version. And I'm lumping these two together because the fact they are both shortened versions of the songs. Whether it was live in the Ukraine, which I feel they just actually played a shortened version. I don't have the credits here. I know later on the tour they definitely played the fuller version. I kind of feel like this was played as a snippet version on purpose, whereas Magic, the live Magic version, is definitively just edited down for the CD. I've heard the audience tape from Live at Nebworth. I've heard them play the full version. So this is just the choice of editing it down to fit the whole show onto one CD. And I hate that. Make it a double CD. Make it a double CD. In fact, give us the whole Nebworth show instead of the Live Magic compilation. I understand what they were doing with the compilation back in 1986. They wanted to get something out there. But give me the whole show for Freddie's final performance with Queen. Obviously didn't know it was Freddie's final performance at the time, but that's what makes it special and why I would definitely put it over Ukraine at this point for the very reason that at least get Freddie's last performance part of it. Give me the full version, it'll probably go up a lot higher on the list for emotion's sake, if nothing else. Okay, up from there, we got the Live on the Tonight Show in 1993, Brian May and Slash. It's a good performance. It's definitely hampered by this television studio. I mean, I'm not a huge television studio kind of guy. I don't think you get a lot of the best performances if you're going to have a live performance. I'd rather have it be in a arena setting where Brian or whoever, the artist, controls more of the setting, the lights, the cues, the emotions. It's just kind of a fun time jam. You don't get this on Tonight Show very much, though. I got to say, maybe you do. But back in the day when I was watching, when you watch the late night shows, they'd have a band come on, perform, and that would be it. So to have Slash join Brian May because he's in the area, it's a lot of fun. And I do appreciate Jay Leno being pretty heavily invested into Brian May at this point. So not bad, but again, there's more that I would prefer. Okay, up from that, we got the two Queen and Paul Rodgers 2005 downloads, live in Firenze and live in Manchester. Again, at this point, some of these rankings are basically your miles might vary. I thought they were early on in the 2005 tour. I don't think they quite had gelled completely yet. Some rawness to it, some, I don't want to say sloppiness because it's not like they're sloppy, but they're just not as tight as they would be. Both of them are decent. They're fine. This is where I put them. At least they're full versions of an arena show, so I'll go there. And Paul does a good job with the vocals. I'm not going to lie. I like Paul Rodgers' voice on it. Okay, from there, the 2011 backing track mix. It's basically, like I said, basically an instrumental version. We do have the backing vocals. It is kind of cool to hear it without the lead vocal on it. It's definitely a unique version. That's why I kind of like it better than some of the live versions we got that are a little rougher. So at the end of the day, I'll give it the 2011 backing track mix right around here as a good curio. Nowhere near the top. When I listen to the Beza version, I'm not going to listen to a backing track mix. I want the vocals on it for sure. So that's where we'll put the backing track mix at this point. All right, next up from that, we got the Trent Reznor reproduction. This is up so high really because it's a curio. Sometimes when you have a unique version in comparison to, like, say, the 20 live versions we have that are all pretty similar, that are all basically not any different from each other structurally, it kind of stands out having this very, very different backing track, a very, very different take on the track. So it's kind of a weird place. In some ways, it'd be down more towards the bottom overall as far as if I like it or not. But it does earn some points for being different and standing out in a way. Something I definitely think you should listen to. But at the end of the day, I want the best version of Tie Your Mother Down. I want the real Tie Your Mother Down. Kind of feel like the meme there with the Magneto meme. I want the real Tie Your Mother Down. perfection. So up from that, live in Rio 1985, pretty low for a Freddie vocal. I don't know why this one's so low. I really couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it's because I have a not so great video quality of it. The works setup was not my favorite setup as far as musically goes. The sound production of that tour was not my favorite. I do like the set list that they created. They kind of tried to go back to a little more rock and style after the Hot Space album was, pretty much a flop overall, not very well liked due to the ventures into the dance side of things. The works tried to bring them back to the rock and roll center. But something about the setup and the sound mix of this tour was not my favorite. I think that's why Time Runner Down suffers, because specifically for the hard rocking songs, it felt a little too 80s for the hard rock, for the hard rock and 70s song. But your miles might vary on that one, my personal opinion. Next up from that, live in Montreux, 2013 with Brian and Carey. I do love the country-ish version. In a way, this might be too low considering I have the 98 version up higher, but I like the 98 version, which we'll get to. Is the original version of this. So this is kind of like more of a redux of that, even if I have a better quality version. And Carey is not a rock and roll singer. Let's be honest with you. I'm not someone who's against the Brian May Carey Ellis collaboration team up, getting the hard rock guitarist with the West End musical star. It makes for an interesting combination at times, but much like Adam Lambert, this is where she would suffer when she tries to do any kind of real rock and roll type style. I prefer Brian singing on it, and when Brian breaks out the red special, it's cool. There's very uniqueness to it because there is no other instrumentation, just the guitar, the voices, and the added keyboard from Jeff Leach. So it's more interesting to me than the Rio version, which I've heard a million times. I've heard that done a million times, but not so much that I would take it over a lot of the Freddie versions or even the full Queen versions, because without the drums, it still does lack something, even if it on a curio side is interesting to listen to. Okay, from there, Milton Keynes 1982, Freddie, another Freddie one that's a little lower. And similarly to the Rock and Rio, it's a Hot Space tour. And I'm not exactly a fan of the setup. The keyboards they add at this point, for 82 and 84, sometimes they add a little bit too much of those 80s keyboards, and I'm not a huge fan of that. There's some synth drums that are in the drum kit. Not that Roger uses them during this song specifically, but the sound mix isn't the best for me. This one might be a little low because in actuality, I love the On Fire the Bull album. But generally speaking, I know when I was listening to it, just this episode, as I was creating the episode, it just didn't hit me as much as some of the other ones. Definitely have some Freddie versions up a lot higher. It almost feels blasphemic that I have two Freddie performances this low, but it is what it is. Okay, next up, I'm going to put the two of them here. Two of the Foo Fighters performances slide in right here. Live in New York City in 2001, which is the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, and then live in Las Vegas 2006, which was the Rock Honors. Both are not actual concerts. They are appearances on award type shows, or, Rock Honors is kind of an award type show. It's Paul Rodgers is absent from the 2006 version, which makes it an interesting curio during that Queen Paul Rodgers era. Obviously, I mentioned before, he is in the band and performing elsewhere on the bill during Rock Honors. But this is really the Foo Fighters show. Foo Fighters showing their friendship with Brian and Roger. Dave Grohl is obviously the one who's taking the lead vocals on these two, and you'll hear later on when I get to the other Foo Fighters performance why I prefer the Taylor Hawkins sung version. These are fine. These are fun. These are kind of quick and dirty. Not really what you I'd rather much have a loose setting, fun, full-on performance in an arena where they don't have any constrictions on time or anything like that. This is much more of a award show performance in and out. All right. From there, we got Queen and Adam Lambert live in Rio in 2015. I don't love Adam's voice on this, much like I did mention with Carey. This is a real straightforward rock and roll. Adam is a little too theatrical for this version. That's the only reason why it's down so low. Okay. Adam does do some Queen songs very well. We'll get to those. Right? We'll get to those. Some of the Adam songs, Adam-led versions of the songs will be much better than the Paul versions of the songs, in my eyes. But we will get there. From there, we got Luxembourg, Queen and Paul Rodgers in 2008. Live in Sheffield, Queen and Paul Rodgers 2005. Glasgow 2008, Antwerp 2008, live in Japan 2005, and live in Frankfurt 2005. All these are Queen and Paul Rodgers performances. They're all in that order, like I said, Luxembourg up to Frankfurt 2005. They're all very good. Your miles may vary on all of them. It's really nothing changed about the the arrangement or anything like that. These are all similarly done performances. It's a Your Miles May Vary. The Frankfurt one grabbed me more than any of the others. That's all I have to say about that. Moving up from there, Live in Kiev 2012 with Queen and Adam Lambert, but of course led by Brian with a little snippet of Adam at the end. Something very fun about this one. This was the first time the band had performed outside of the Queen and Paul Rodgers era. So a couple of years after that ended, we thought the band were done. They didn't think they were going to tour again. They got Adam to perform. And I feel like Brian and Roger kind of took this as a new lease on life. And you really tell that Brian's having a good time here, much different than the 1990 Cross version where he was kind of struggling with being the leader here. He was in his element here and pretty much the leader of the band. Even if he is not the greatest front man, he still felt like that elder statesman. I'm just going to plug in, sing along, and have a good time. And you're going to have a good time with me. And I like Roger and his interactions as well. Up from that, 2011 in the iTunes Festival with the Foo Fighters, basically because of Taylor Hawkins. His love for Queen is unabashed, it's passionate, and it's a great, great rock vocal. Maybe it's because Queen and Paul Rodgers and when Adam Lambert do it, this fits in nicely with the more hard rocking version that we have, which sometimes gets lost a little bit, especially in the Queen and Adam Lambert era. So I love seeing the Foo Fighters get a little bit of that grr back into it. What a fun piece. And it's always great seeing these guys together. They obviously are big fans. From there, I got the two Wembley performances. The second date, July 12th, is next. And up from that, just a smidge better in my eyes, is July 11th, 1986. And right up from there, actually, is Live in Budapest, 1986. Those are the 386 performances. Queen at that point is a wonderfully like full-size stadium rock band. I do feel like Freddie's a better vocalist a little bit earlier on in the era, but these are definitely fun, big performances. Even if his voice is maybe a little tired overall, but really he holds the audience in the palm of his hands. Really, if I had to pick out of the three, which are very similar versions, I'm going to go with Budapest. Freddie has a great voice in that one. He seems to play around with it just a little bit more. July 11th is next down the list because it's better than the 12th because he seems more playful than two. July 12th seems a little more rote in comparison to the 11th and in Budapest. But saying that Freddie wrote it all is not a detriment. I mean, compared to everybody else, he would still be the almost most boring of Freddie performances would be better than at least 95% of rock stars today, to be honest with you. And rock stars of any time, really. Freddie's just that damn good in my eyes. All right, up from Budapest 86, we got the 1991 Hollywood remix by producer Matt Wallace. Interesting version. At the end of the day, I'm going to like it less of the album or single version, which is the band's version. Remixes by outside agencies or entities are always going to be in my eyes lesser. It's more about, does it do the song justice, and is it acceptable? Is it keep the integrity of the song without going too far into some wild territory that just kind of kills the song. This one does a good job. This one's, like I said, mentioned it before, it stays in the realm of the integrity of the song. Add some interesting things, add some things I don't like, but overall, the studio version is pretty cool. Like hearing that vocal take. I love the guitar dropping out. My own little stick that I do, so I can't knock that one. So that's where we have that. Next up from that, the live on VH1 1998 Brian's version, one of the highest we got from Brian, and that's basically because of the uniqueness of it. And I know it's funny saying unique considering Brian and Carrie do something similar later on. But this is that first step to trying something new. The first 3 minutes with that introductory story, which is a funny performance story. Brian being a lot looser in 1998 than he was back in 1990 and even 1993. He's having fun. He's having a good old time. The band's having a good old time jamming with him. And when you realize what the song is, you're like, oh, this is much, much different. But it's a very cool version overall. At the end of the day, again, is it the best version? No, but it's probably the most unique version that's going to be as high up on the list as it is, just because I do enjoy listening to it overall, probably as an alternative. All right, from there, we got the single version and the album version. You're going to hear the single version all the time because that's what you get on all the compilations. I like the album version a little better because I do love hearing that staircase introduction to the album. Again, on a playlist, it kind of makes sense to do the single version. If you're going to start the album, you got to start the album with the album version because of the staircase introduction, which is a lot of fun to listen to. A lot of cool puzzles there in the aural sense. So I prefer the album version overall, but as far as on a playlist goes, I probably would use a single version more than the album version, unless I'm going to lead off the playlist with Time Running Out. Okay, from there we got four left. This is where I'm going to slide in the Freddie Mercury tribute version. Now, it's a little bit weird for me to say Joe Elliott and Slash's version is this high up when we got all the other full Queen performances down below. But it's the emotions. It's the emotions behind this version. It's that first step onto the stage since 1986, with the first time on the stage as Queen without Freddie Mercury. Brian, Roger, and John being very emotional. Brian, Roger, and John started to show off themselves with the audience. It feels like such a love fest at that point. And then getting Joe Elliott to have a good time, having Slash have a good time. This is a really beautiful performance. It's one of my favorites of all time, especially of this song. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be, I'm going to rather hear a full-on version without outside entities, if anything else. We got 3 left. This is I'm surprised at how high this one is, to be honest with you. Going into this episode, I didn't think this would be quite as high, but here we are. Live at the Brixton Academy in 1993, the Brian May Band. Brian May in his first tour, about midway through his first full-on tour for his solo album, and he feels like he has things in hand. He is the leader of the band at this point. He does the lead vocal, which are fine. He has a lot of support to help him get across what he wants to get across. And he cuts loose, especially on the guitar solos. Some of his best jam works, the best solo work and all in Tire Miller Down coming from Brixton Academy. It's a much more confident performance. He has a great vocal to it. Even though I prefer his voice on more like folksy acoustic stuff, he actually does a pretty good job here. I appreciate that one. So yeah, that's where we go here. So we finally have the last 2. The last 2 we haven't mentioned. If you haven't kept, I wouldn't be surprised if you're lost at this point. It's either going to be Live in Montreal 1981 from Queen Rock Montreal or Live Killers. And the winner and crown jewel version, very tough call to make between these 2. They're very similar performances. The winner is Live Killers. It's kind of funny because Live Killers as a whole is generally, I consider, a weaker album compared to Rock Montreal. Live Killers might have some set list curios we don't get later on in the 80s. But Montreal is just a great sounding gig. It's probably one of the best like filmed gigs. But there's something about this Live Killers performance, which I never really noticed before in comparison. I kind of vaguely went past it. I always liked it. I always enjoyed it. But this version is really raw. There's a lot of energy to it. I think it might be Freddie's best vocal. I can hear a lot of great Roger stuff in the background. The energy is off the charts. This is the fastest pace we have of Tire Miller Down. And there's something about that in the live setting with the audience eating it up. And it goes against everything I said and for I like it. I prefer Tire Miller Down opening a tour or opening a concert rather, or opening an encore. This is just kind of thrown in towards the end, but the energy is absolutely amazing. So there it is. Live Killers version is my crown jewel. Wow. Whew, this has been a great long episode. Not quite done. It's time to rank it. A scale of 1 to 11, because we always turn up to 11 here on PLD Projects. What do I rank Tire Miller Down? And well, I'm going to give it a 9.5. 9.5. I prefer other songs overall, but I do love, this is probably one of my favorite straightforward rock songs. This is probably one of the more straightforward rock songs the band has. If you're going to compare them to their 70s counterparts, this doesn't quite have the Queen harmonies and have some of that Queen like eccentricities. It's pretty much Brian saying, I'm going to write a straight out balls to the wall hard rocking song, and he succeeds because they succeed at almost every musical thing that they try, honestly. But at the end of the day, one reason I like Queen is their eccentricity, is their big vocal bombast. This is great for a live performance, and again, 9.5 out of 11 is definitely not bad, but it's not going to slide into my top 10. It stays off the top 10 list. But yeah, that's all we have to say about that. All right, guys, we are ending the episode now. I thank you for sticking with me this long. I really do appreciate it. If this is your first time here, please click that like, click that subscribe. Hop on over to my regular PLD Products YouTube page. Click like and subscribe there as well. That's more movie and TV related. This is the music side of things. And if you're on the audio side of things, well, you're on the same feed anyway. So leave those comments. Please subscribe there as well. It really helps the channel out. And if you want to help the channel even further, patreon.com/PLD Projects. We have a great crew of people. Join people such as Austin Cadell, Jeremiah Morris, Matthew Kearns, Brandon Buckingham, Jeff Alterman, and the rest of my crew as well. I couldn't do it all without you. I really appreciate you guys. We have some great times in our chat, some great hangouts, some extra content on Patreon as well. But if if you can't join on Patreon, I fully, completely understand. The best thing you can do to help is just to spread the word, get people out here, make sure people are knowing that we're here listening. I hope you enjoyed the content put out today, and I hope you enjoy the content we put out next week. And always, next week on Crown Jewels, a very beautiful Freddie ballad, a lesser episode as far as time goes, not a lesser episode as far as quality, but a lot shorter episode next week. That's what I was looking for, because there's not nearly as many versions of You Take My Breath Away. But let me tell you, this is one of Freddie's most beautiful piano ballads, and I can't wait to discuss it. That is next week, but that's not this week. This week was Timing Her Down, and I hope you enjoyed it. And stick around. That's it for this week, folks. I appreciate you sticking around. Stay tuned for next week. But until then, keep yourself alive, and of course, God save the Queen.